I didn't know what to expect coming into Space Marine 2. It's been really hyped, but I gotta say as a new 40k fan that I have been absolutely blown away by how much fun this game is. The combat's engaging and satisfyingly bloody in a way that only 40k's grimdark universe could be, and it's just about everything I could have wanted from a story surrounding a Space Marine from the 40k universe. And like I said, I'm just a newly minted 40k fan. I can't imagine how some of you long-term fans are gonna feel checking this game out yourself. Despite the success though, Space Marine 2 might leave some 40k universe initiates like me scratching their heads, while simultaneously leaving long-term fans craving just a little bit more after its surprisingly short campaign. And I think old fans and new fans will probably both agree that there are some mixed feelings about the multiplayer component of the game. So let's dive in and I'll tell you exactly what I mean, and if by the end you think I've done a good job and you want to see more and you don't want to be questioned by the Inquisition, well, it may be best to hit that like button and subscribe, lest you be accused of heresy.
Let this tragedy spur our valor.
Starting with the story-driven campaign, which I highly recommend you guys play before doing any of the multiplayer stuff, by the way, because it will spoil some of the story for you. Space Marine 2 is a pretty fun dive into the grimdark universe of 40k. It touches on those hallmarks you might expect, like the fight against the Tyranids and other more foul agents of chaos for the Emperor of Mankind. To give you guys some context without spoiling too much, the game is a follow-up to the broadly well-received Space Marine 1, released sometime around 13 years ago back in 2011, and it centers around a post-human super being crafted to fight the agents of chaos named Titus, who is a captain of the vaunted Ultramarines of Ultramar. He's since been fighting as a Black Shield of the Death Watch under the name Nullus as penance for his contact with Chaos, which marked him as a potential heretic. This, if you don't know, is a really big deal in the 40k universe. The story really begins though with Titus coming close to death and having to be converted to a Primaris Marine, which I'm not going to get into the politics of in this video. I'm just a new fan. I don't know how everyone feels about it. I know that it's a pretty touchy subject, but anyway, he's upgraded to this new upgraded version of the Space Marines and is granted a conditional reprieve by the chaplain of the Second Company, allowing him to return to his beloved chapter, only now demoted to a lieutenant. And as any good story goes, well, nothing is really as it seems and nothing is mere coincidence, and I'm going to leave it as that because this is not a spoiler review. Going on then without touching on any major story beats so as not to spoil anything for you guys, he's introduced to a new cast of characters, new battle brothers from the Second Company who are understandably suspicious of an unusually old Primaris Marine with an uncertain background. He just suddenly showed up and he's a lieutenant, and these guys are, they don't know who he is. This ends up becoming a bit of a storytelling device for people who didn't play through the first game, as we get to learn more about Titus's background through the eyes of his companions. Having not played the first game and not having even been a 40k universe fan back then, I really appreciate that they did this, even though that it still left some things as a question mark for me. The story though is well supported by an excellent cast of voice actors who do a really good job of both sounding the part as well as portraying each character true to the 40k universe. Lines about the devotion to the Emperor or to Battle Brothers or to fighting chaos all land believably when it could have all too easily fell into the trap of coming off as campy. The 40k universe, after all, is a grim, dark universe. It's not one that has a lot of humor in it, so that would have been a bit out of place. Performances are also backed up by competent facial animations, something I feel maybe a bit too rare in the AAA game market right now, and the body rigging is also really good. It does a good job of communicating the nuance of the characters' feelings through the story, and it helps you empathize a bit more with them. All of which really serve to get me immersed into this world and just become wrapped up in the story and progress of the main character Titus. Where the story falls a bit short though is in bringing the uninitiated up to speed. The 40k universe has so much lore and backstory that it can be a bit overwhelming. I'm 20 books into the Horus Heresy, for example, and I'm nowhere near even being caught up to the end of that arc, let alone to the present-day 40k lore. This meant that while I'm fast becoming a devoted fan and I have a lot of knowledge about 40k, I didn't have enough knowledge to fully appreciate some of the story beats in the game that were surely meant to land a bit harder judging by their clear embellishment by the developers. With this being the first 40k game in recent memory to appeal to a much wider gaming audience, and the first game to have come out in this series after 13 years, it seems like it would have been a great opportunity to use this opportunity to do a bit of a pre-roll introduction to the 40k universe to bring newbies up to speed on some of the basics and who the main players are in the 40k universe. Basics like the current state of humanity, the Emperor of Mankind, Chaos, the Horus Heresy, Chaos Marines, and the ongoing war. It needn't have been long or overly in-depth, it just needed to be enough to prime players to help them contextualize what's going on. In the end though, it's not the biggest deal and it doesn't overshadow the success of the game. After all, what got me into 40k in the first place was that Astartes fan video that was posted on YouTube a couple years ago, which literally explained nothing. There wasn't even any lines in the short. It just gave me enough of a taste of how cool Space Marines are and created enough mystery around the adversaries they face that I wanted to learn more. And I'm absolutely certain that Space Marine 2 is going to do the same thing for a whole new swath of fans who are going to become eager to soak up the rich universe that the lore has on offer.
The Xenos would have felt that.
Victory is ours, brothers.
While the story and technical accomplishment of the character's presentation was fantastic, probably the strongest part of the game has got to be the combat. From the very beginning of the game, the weight and power of the Space Marines is conveyed superbly through masterfully crafted animations and transitions and accompanying sound special effects that makes it feel like you are embodying the suit of a superhuman Space Marine. Bolters feel substantial like they should, tearing through weaker opponents with a satisfying thunk and straight up deleting others. And there's also a great variety of alternatives to bolters, like plasma weapons or heavy double-handed weapons meant for taking down bigger and badder opponents, all used in their own strategic way for benefits and drawbacks in different situations. Then there's the melee side of things, my personal favorite way of dispatching heretics in Xenos filth. Each swing of Titus's chainsword through the myriad of combinations possible feels substantial and satisfying, especially when finishing them off with an epic fatality animation. What impressed me most though is how they solved the dual-wielding bolter and chainsword as described in lore. I thought it might be awkward to have a ranged weapon in one hand and a melee weapon in the other, but the controls allowed the whole experience to flow beautifully and all with the default control scheme. And by the way, I've been using an Xbox remote and I would personally recommend using it for playing through the campaign. You might want to switch when you do PvP just to have an edge, but at least for the single player, I think it makes the experience a bit more enjoyable. Like the ranged weapons, melee weapons also have a variety of options, including swords and hammers, and even later a power fist in the multiplayer components of the game. Sadly though, there are no power claws yet, but I suspect we're going to see some of those coming up in planned DLCs later this year. But none of this would have been fun if the enemies themselves didn't provide an interesting challenge in the need for switching up the weapons that you're using. You'll find yourself wanting to use deranged bolters for dealing with ranged enemies which will snipe you from afar, preferring not to get up close and personal, whereas you'll also have to simultaneously face off against elites which will do tons of damage right up in your face, causing you to have to constantly be ready to parry them in order to prevent them from digging into your health pool after they chew through your armor. In fact, one of the only ways you're going to be able to finish those higher difficulties is by constantly and strategically chaining those parries and finishing moves in order to prevent the enemy from finally getting into your health pool, which, by the way, does not regenerate over time without the use of one of the very limited medikit kits you'll find laying around the world randomly. In that sense, Space Marine 2 kind of plays a bit more of like a hardcore Souls type experience, where you're probably going to find yourself dying a lot in order to finish a certain area or defeat one of the harder bosses. Just about the only thing I can fault with the combat system is in the way blocking works. You're notified via blue icon when an enemy is about to perform a blockable attack. If it's red, all you can do is dodge. But the timing between that icon and when the attack actually happens varies greatly, which required me to pay close attention to the physical attacks themselves in order to perform a proper block that prevents them from digging into my armor. It made it a lot more difficult then to defend myself, especially when there was tons of enemies surrounding me, but I guess that just makes the game a bit more difficult, which masochists are definitely going to find themselves enjoying, especially when they're playing in the highest difficulty. All of this is supported and backdropped by highly detailed and rich environments that 40k fans will struggle to tear their eyes from in between combat. The worlds of Space Marine 2, and there are about 3 to be accurate in this campaign, are a treat to behold. The 40k universe is a glutton for unreal scale, and the game gets that right. I've never seen scale done this well for a 40k universe game. While Space Marine isn't an open world, and the levels are ultimately linear in nature with some meandering paths, it never feels confined unless the game of course wants you to feel claustrophobic in certain parts of the story. Even in the base of operations, the battle barge you start from in each mission has a rich set of details to pay close attention to, from saluting subservient underlings to the Mechanicum, to overheard conversations to random pieces of equipment. There's always some cool detail to find. Best of all, you can experience the campaign at any point with friends. The entire thing is a co-op experience if you want it to be. The host of the session will always be Titus, leaving your friends to inhabit the supporting cast of Marines through the story. The only strange downside to doing it this way is that progress in the campaign isn't saved by non-hosts, meaning that if you join, that you're still going to need to play through the campaign yourself in order to catch up or for the completion to count fully. Hopefully then they patch this out in some way, giving you the option to choose to mark progression by playing with friends. So try to keep that in mind if you're going to plan on playing this together with a couple of buddies. The only real issue I found with the campaign is that it was just a little bit too short for my liking. In all, the campaign lasted me around 14 hours, and probably could have gone a bit longer if I decided to play in the highest difficulty where I would have expected to die repeatedly at certain points. Personally, I played in veteran difficulty for much of the campaign, which is the recommended difficulty in order to enjoy it as intended. I assume that its length, though, may have been a result of them leaning on the multiplayer component that comes after you finish the campaign, which is a bit of a mixed bag that we'll go into in a moment. And need I even mention the graphics at this point? It should be pretty clear here how damned clean they are. As I said in the start of the video, it's a spectacle to behold, a visual feast for fans and initiates alike of the 40k universe. The only fault that I could find was that it doesn't support anything but 16:9 resolutions for the time being. There is a planned patch though coming in a month or so that will bring in support for 21:9, so I will be looking forward to that as I am a heavy widescreen user myself. In terms of visual bugs, I never really experienced anything serious. I did have a few black screens in one instance when I was playing co-op with a friend, but that was the only experience that I can recall that really stopped me from playing the game. After finishing the story, you'll probably want to see what's in store for you to experience with other fans. Aside from the co-op of the main campaign, Star Marine 2 offers two other modes to jump into. A PvE side campaign series where you get to play as some of the other squads featured in the main campaign to see how their stories played out from their point of view, and a PvP component with 3 different modes that's easily the weakest of the bunch, and maybe the most disappointing of an otherwise overall stellar game. Well, they've done a fine job of making a good progression system with this multiplayer component, with good perks, visual upgrades, and weapons to strive for. There's only a handful of small maps with designs that feel like they harken back to the days of Unreal Tournament. I can't deny though that even now, having played each map several times, I still want to go back and play a bit more. I know that eventually though, this limited selection of maps is probably going to grow a bit stale. It feels that there's a lot left on the table then for the PvP side of things that they could improve with upcoming DLCs. A better selection of maps with more contemporary takes on size and design would definitely improve the experience overall, and some more interesting objective-based modes like a mode where you could perhaps take on a ship and take over its bridge, or do some boarding actions, or a mini campaign in the style of Battlefront 2 could all make for a much more interesting use of the rich 40k lore. Thankfully though, like I said, they are planning on delivering some DLC content going forward with some seasons of content via other types of live service games. So we'll just have to see how they flesh out the multiplayer component of this game, which could shore up any of the downsides that still exist. And I'm certainly expecting that they're going to add to the already rich selection of different chapter armors you can choose from with different color schemes and the mix and matching that you can do to really make your Space Marine your own. I think that's one of the coolest parts of the multiplayer experience, and I'm absolutely certain it's going to be a lot of fun for a lot of 40k fans to spend a good deal of time getting their Space Marines to look exactly the way they want them to, or like the very same tabletop armies that they might have at home. I'm personally really digging the Dark Angels, but what would you choose? What are you going to customize your Space Marine as? Let me know down below. Overall then, while there are some small issues with Space Marine 2 with a lack of long-term content on launch and some small technical issues, the visual spectacle and masterfully done combat system more than make up for it. I'm excited then for what's next for the upcoming content, and how the breakout success of Space Marine 2 could herald a new and bright future for the grimdark universe of 40k. I'd give the game then a solid 9 out of 10, just short of a perfect score for the reasons I've outlined in the video. If you found this review to be helpful and want to support the Emperor of Mankind, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe, and maybe consider supporting me on Patreon to help me weather the warp storms of content creation. Otherwise, hope to see you guys in the next one.